This PowerPoint presentation is made available as a virtual public meeting due to coronavirus or COVID-19. Please submit questions or comments directly to the city engineer. His email address is provided at the end of this presentation. Thank you. This is the City of Elizabeth Pre-Disaster Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan presentation. Before we start this presentation, we're going to have a safety moment on COVID-19. Wash your hands often for at least 20 seconds with soap and water. Practice social distancing of at least 6 feet from anyone else. Avoid touching eyes, nose, or mouth when hands have not been washed. Cover mouth and nose with cloth face cover when around people. Cover cough and sneezes with a tissue or use your elbow. Wash your hands afterwards. The City of Elizabeth has a Federal Emergency Management Agency approved pre-disaster natural hazard mitigation plan. The hazard mitigation plan must be updated every 5 years, and public meetings and participation are part of the process. The hazard mitigation plan is administered by FEMA and is a planning tool that identifies the city's risks and vulnerabilities associated with natural disasters. The process helps develop long-term strategies for protecting people and property from future natural hazards. FEMA provides GIS HAZUS software and planning modules and goals. Some of the modules are shown on the right-hand side. HAZUS is a nationally applicable standardized methodology that contains models for estimating potential losses from earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and tsunamis. HAZUS uses geographic information systems technology to estimate physical, economic, and social impacts of disasters. It graphically illustrates the limits of identified high-risk locations due to earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and tsunamis. How does FEMA define mitigation? Mitigation is the effort to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impacts of disasters. In order for mitigation to be effective, action should be taken now, that is before the next disaster, to reduce human and financial consequences. Did you know that for every $1 spent on hazard mitigation, there's at least $4 in future benefits? The city has 5 mitigation goals. Goal 1, protect life. Goal 2, protect property. Goal 3, promote sustainable economy. Goal 4, protect the environment. And Goal 5, increase public preparedness. Some may ask, why have a mitigation plan? The city and the public will benefit from hazard mitigation planning. The hazard mitigation plan provides updated information on the potential natural hazards, the most appropriate types of mitigation for each identified hazard, and to be eligible for FEMA flooding. The public will ultimately benefit from the city's proactive actions. Updating the hazard mitigation plan will assist the city in identification and preparation for potential natural hazards, ultimately reducing the impacts of a disaster and possibly avoiding the natural hazard completely. This in turn will reduce or eliminate impacts to the public when natural hazards occur. Increase value for every dollar spent on hazard mitigation against future risks and damages. Being prepared can reduce local government and public fear, anxiety, and losses that accompany natural disasters. Also, communities, families, and individuals should be prepared and know what to do before, during, and after a natural disaster, especially if they live in a more vulnerable area. How does the hazard mitigation plan work? The city uses a 4-step process. Step 1, organize the planning process and resources. Step 2, assess risks. Step 3, develop a mitigation strategy. Step 4, adopt and implement the plan. The city has integrated the hazard mitigation plan with the recently updated local master plan. This involves land use planning for future sustainable growth, transportation planning, housing policies, and economic developments. The Hazard Mitigation Plan will improve community resiliency and strives to protect public facilities and critical infrastructures, natural resources that include coastline and the Elizabeth River, and historic properties and cultural resources. What natural hazards can occur in the city of Elizabeth? The most common natural hazard in Elizabeth is flooding, hurricanes, and nor'easters. But severe thunderstorm, extreme cold and heat, earthquakes, and tornadoes can also be severe natural hazards. Let's talk about earthquakes and tornadoes. Did you know there had been 3 earthquakes of 1.5 magnitude or greater in the last 12 months in or near New Jersey, and 10 earthquakes in the tri-state area over the last 4 years? So, why is the city vulnerable to future earthquakes? Well, soil classification systems for earthquakes indicate that the city is estimated to be almost 50% located within soft soil classification. That is Class E soils, shown in red on the left-hand side. Class E soil has the highest risk of liquefaction hazards in New Jersey and subject to the greatest damage from a severe earthquake. Liquefaction occurs when loose silts and sands below the water table become suspended in the groundwater as the ground shakes during an earthquake. The sediment grains are then no longer supporting the ground above, but the weight of the ground falls back upon a layer that has now basically become a liquid. With continued ground shaking, pressure builds up and forces water to the surface through cracks and crevices in the ground. The water carries with it the suspended sediments and ejects it at the ground surface and can lead to subsidence as the material settles. The graphic on this slide shows historic earthquakes and Class E soils. Also shown as 2 large purple dots in this small inset, the 2 largest earthquakes, 5.0 to 5.9 magnitude, were just north and east of the coastline of the city. Also in this graphic, you can see that the city sits on top of sand, silts, and gravel. On August 25th, 2015, news publication quoted from Rutgers experts stated, "In fact, researchers say that New Jersey is overdue for a moderate earthquake of 5.0 or greater. Long overdue, but for how long? That is the question." During and after an earthquake, buildings can collapse. Roads can crack open, and water and sewer lines can also fail. Though uncommon, the latest tornadoes were recorded on August 7, 2019 in Springfield, New Jersey, Millville, New Jersey, and Hightstown, New Jersey, with winds of 70 miles an hour or greater. Also on July 1, 2013, there was another EF0 tornado in Summit. The last tornadoes in Union County had an estimated damage of over $7 million total. As climate change continues, increase of natural disasters are occurring. Just in 2019, there were 8 tornadoes in New Jersey, 5 with 65 to 85 mile an hour winds, known as EF0, and 3 with 86 to 110 mile an hour winds, or EF1. Prior to 2019, there were only 13 total tornadoes going back to 2001. Every 5 years, the city evaluates their hazard vulnerability rankings. High ranking include flooding, coastal storm, nor'easter, hurricane, coastal erosion, thunderstorm, severe winter storm, extreme heat, and earthquake. Medium vulnerability includes drought, extreme cold, hailstorm, and mosquito-borne illness. Low vulnerability includes avalanche, expansive soil, ice jam, land subsidence, tornado, tsunamis, and wildfire. Why prepare? Why should the city and residents be concerned and proactive? According to an October 31st, 2012 news article, Elizabeth, New Jersey was among the communities ravaged by the superstorm. More than 10,000 people live in each square mile of the city, most in shared housing, and all were affected. The city of Elizabeth is very vulnerable to coastal flooding and sea level rise. Floods that were once considered rare are more common with rising tides and storm surges. Natural disasters disrupt hundreds of thousands of lives every year. Each disaster has lasting effects, both to people and property. If a natural disaster occurs in our community, local government and disaster relief organizations will try to help, but we need to be ready as well. Local responders may not be able to reach everyone immediately, or they may need to focus their efforts somewhere else first. You should know how to respond to severe weather or any disaster that could occur in your area. Hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes, extreme cold and heat, flooding, or just severe thunderstorms can cause long-term power outages. Everyone should be ready to be self-sufficient for at least 3 days. This means providing for your own shelter, first aid, food, water, and sanitation. How does FEMA assist? FEMA's hazard mitigation assistance include Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, Pre-Disaster Mitigation, and Flood Mitigation Assistance. Between the months of October 1st, 2018 and January 31st, 2019, FEMA provided approximately $235.2 million in pre-disaster mitigation. They also provided $160 million for flood mitigation assistance. What do these FEMA programs provide? FEMA can assist with property acquisition, structure demolition and relocation, structure elevation and reconstruction, dry flood proofing on historical and non-residential structures, localized and non-localized flood risk reduction projects, and emergency generators. As we conclude with this presentation, we'd like to reiterate that FEMA's hazard mitigation includes public education and outreach, planning and studies, policy and zoning developments, flooding mitigation projects, structural mitigation projects, stormwater and wastewater projects, and staff training. Now that you have seen the presentation, what do you consider to be the greatest natural hazard or hazards in the city of Elizabeth? What programs or improvements do you think can make the city more resilient? Are you aware of areas that are prone to flooding or just drain too slow after a storm? Any questions about emergency shelters or responses by the city after a natural disaster? Why not let the city know what you think? Thank you. If you have any questions or comments, you can email them directly to the city engineer, Daniel Loomis. His email address is shown below. You can also go directly to the city's hazard mitigation website, and on that website you can access the current plan or the draft updated plan to review, and then submit comments or questions directly to Dan Loomis. Thank you. Thank you very much for viewing this public presentation, and stay safe.